Well, I was going through the headlines. Family feud leaves 69 brothers dead. Government leader caught in affair. Gang rape leads to victims' death and dismemberment. Girls kidnapped and put into sexual slavery. Travelers not safe on the highway. These are the headlines that would have been for the judges. It's a crazy book. Do you remember when Joshua told them, "You're not going to be able to follow the Lord"? And they said, "We're going to follow the Lord." "You're not going to be able to do it." Guess what? They didn't do it. And their spiritual apathy led to moral demise, which brought about an apostasy. They quit following the Lord and started enjoying the other gods. It's more enjoyable to be with the other gods. You get to have sex when you go to the temple. We don't allow that here. They probably had Rastafarians. We don't smoke that here. What happens is suddenly you're not following God's ways and you start to do what everybody else does. And then that leads to anarchy politically. The world falls apart, which it's almost kind of weird the way what I'm talking about mirrors America in many ways. And the theme of Judges is this statement: everyone did as they saw fit in their own eyes. So, Moses said, love and obey God, teach your children, be thankful, separate yourself from the pagans. They didn't. And they ended up dealing with invasion, slavery, poverty, and civil war. Welcome to the Judges. Now, judges were actually people that God would lift up to pull folks out of the slavery and the problems that they found themselves in. Okay? And it leads to a question: no matter how dark the day, God's going to provide a way out, which we see over and over and over again, and kind of made me wonder, could he call on us? Are we available for him to pull the atmosphere out of the pit at work, at home, with our spouse, with our friends, with society? It's a good question. So here's how Judges rolls. In chapter 1, verse 2, the Lord said, "Go and get the land that I gave you." Now Joshua has died, the leader's gone, and the Lord's still speaking. And the question becomes, who's going to fill the leadership vacuum? Remember at my first church, when I got there, 66 people voted me in. And there wasn't even 66 people coming. It was the only unanimous vote I ever got when I took a church over. 66-0. I thought I was doing well. We built the church up to a couple hundred folks, have an amazing ministry going on. The Lord moves me to a 1,000-member church, and there's the leadership vacuum. And I tried to prepare them for it. Guess what happened? They started fighting who was going to have the power. And all of a sudden, they went back to being a broken, small church that somebody ended up closing up. Broke my heart. It was long after I left, but nevertheless, that's the last thing you want to see, a church closing up, especially where you used to be the boss. And to give you the idea what the life and times were back in the day, they catch this king from another country, and they cut off his thumbs and big toes. And the reason they did that is because this guy used to cut off everybody else's thumbs and big toes. He says in verse 7, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes I cut off to use under my table for scraps. What comes around goes around. I guess, I don't know. People get all upset about the violence in the Bible. Well, this is the way of the world back then. It was a crazy place. I don't think us Americans can appreciate that we live in a completely civilized world compared to what was going on back in 1100 BC. And so you're going to find a theme happening. In verse 19, they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had iron chariots. Verse 21, the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived there. In verse 27, the Canaanites persisted in living in the land. I thought they were told to drive everybody out. How come they didn't do it? You see, in not fulfilling their objective, this leads to their demise. And sometimes we do this, don't we? We're pretty much Christian, 80%, 60%, 70%. We're still in the high end side, right? I'm 90% Christian. Well, here's the problem with God. That 20% that you don't allow him to be Lord over, that's where Satan goes to work. And like gangrene starts to spread and infect the rest of your faith, and the next thing you know, if you're not fighting the spiritual battle, you're going to end up being a neutralized Christian at best. And that's what happens to these guys. And we think, well, how could this be? Well, it says in chapter 2 that because you don't tear down their altars and just worship me, well, these people are going to become thorns in your sides, and their gods are going to be a snare to you. And it says that God did not drive out the nations in order to test Israel. He allowed them to remain. And here's how it works. If you and I are diligent about uprooting things that we know God doesn't want, then he gives us the victory. But there's that moment when he says, are you going to do it my way? Or are you going to be a compromiser? And it's easy for us Americans to compromise because, the American dream's not too bad. Our music, our movies, our conversations, the way we live, the way we give, it's all infected with a lot of secularized thinking. And we're not in the habit of cutting off anything that's ungodly. We've kind of learned how to adjust to it and understand it and forgive it and put up with it and explain it away. And the next thing you know, it starts to infiltrate our Christianity. That is the message of Judges. And in chapter 2, verse 10, it says that all the generations who were gathered to their fathers that knew Moses and Joshua, there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. And I couldn't help but think about our generation. Have we done a good job of passing on the faith? I don't know that we have. We have Christianity that was do it by the rules, and no, it's all about grace. That the world changed on us, and we didn't change with it. And the next thing you know, we've got my generation, the generation after me, and now my children's generation. They don't really know about Jesus too much. In fact, Judy was telling me in her office, some of the people didn't know who Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were, and she was explaining the stories, and they were fascinated. These are people in their 30s that don't even know the basic Bible stories. I'm not saying, oh my goodness, I'm just letting you know, that's how biblically bankrupt our society is. And I'm in the gym today, getting buffed out. And I'm talking to Clint Searcy, who's a lot more buffed out than I am. And we're talking about, murder that took place, and we start complaining about society. And this guy that I don't even know gets up in my face and he says, "What happened to our world? Why is all this violence taking place? When I was young, this wasn't happening, occasionally, but now it's the normal thing." I said, "I think it's because there's no moral absolute anymore. There's no one out there saying, that's wrong. We're so busy saying, well, whatever you feel comfortable with. Who am I to say you're wrong? We've closed the Bible so that there's no absolute truth, and now people are doing whatever they see fit in their eyes. And guess what's happening to our society? It's really going bad. And so these guys serve the Baals. They do the female deity, the Ashtoreth. And so, friends, God gives them over to the result of their behavior. There's this powerful verse that I don't like. It's Isaiah 45:7, where God says, "I'm the one who creates good and bad." You're like, well, wait a minute. Somebody must have added in bad. Because surely God's not part of the bad. Well, sometimes it's not his preference, but it is the fruit of our disobedience. And the bad comes. And you have to know this about God. Whenever bad comes, he goes to work fixing it. If we allow him to. If we invite him in. You do bad, and you say, "I'm sorry, forgive me," he comes in, fixes it. But if you don't say, "I'm sorry, forgive me," guess what happens? Now you're living in bad. And that wasn't his plan. And it gets even better. Listen to this crazy God that we belong to. It says that he sold them into the hands of their enemies. And when they couldn't take it anymore, they were severely distressed. The Lord raised up a judge to deliver them. Okay? God steps in. And this is how it's worded. "For the Lord was moved to pity for their groanings because of those who oppressed and afflicted them." He cares about his undeserving children. And this is the most important thing that I can say to you today, right now. I found this really cool story. It's about these missionaries. They go to Africa, and they're trying to explain the concept of Christianity and love. And every word in the African language, it ends with I and A and you. Except for love. It only ends in I and A, not you. And so the missionary is trying to explain, well, I don't understand. He says, could you love your wife with the I? And they'd say, yes. That would mean that the wife had been loved, but the love was gone. Okay? And then he says, could you love your wife with the A? Yes, they responded. That kind of love depends on the wife's actions. She would be loved as long as she remained faithful and took good care of her husband. He said, could you love your wife with the U? And everybody laughs. Of course not. If you said that, you would have to keep loving your wife no matter what she did. Even if she never got you water and never made you meals. Even if she committed adultery, you would have to just keep loving her. And no one would ever love with the you. It just doesn't exist. Missionary said, could God love you with the you? And everybody sat there in silence. And suddenly they started to see something they'd never seen before. Do you know what that would mean? That would mean that God would keep loving us over and over while all the time we rejected his love. He would love us even though we kept on sinning. Missionary says, that's the love of God. These guys keep on sinning, making mistakes, blowing it, and guess what? God keeps loving them. It's powerful. This is God in the Old Testament loving people that are worshiping other gods and totally turning away from Him. Okay, and what they would do is they'd give their daughters as wives for the others. They'd take the daughters and sons of the other gods. They'd get unequally yoked, and then they would be in slavery for 8 years, and then God would hear their cries, and He'd raise up somebody. And I like this because in chapter 3, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. And this is going to be a regular theme. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon people, and all of a sudden, power happens. Now, you know I'm always trying to make charismatics out of you. Not so that you'll speak in tongues. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm going for the New Testament, the Old Testament Christianity, where the Holy Spirit comes on you and suddenly you have power to pray over somebody and they get healed, to get supernatural guidance, to see Him change the situations. Because that's what happens over and over again. And that's what happens here. They cry out to the Lord. He saves them. And then they're happy for 18 years. And then they reject the Lord again. And they go into slavery for... No, actually, they go into slavery for 18 years. First time it was 8 years. Now it's 18 years. Okay? And then they cry out, and the Lord comes and saves them. And there's all kinds of wild stories. And well... By the way, in chapter 4, we have Deborah, a woman leader. This is a big deal because, you know, when I was in the ministry, it's so weird. When I'm getting ordained in Los Angeles, they ask me, what do you think about homosexuality? I get installed in Philadelphia, and they say, what do you think about women in the ministry? Okay? The West Coast is a little bit different than the East Coast. But I would be in churches where they would be saying, we don't have women leaders. And I'm thinking, how archaic. It's not in the Bible. Well, actually, it's in Judges chapter 4. We have a woman leader. And these churches that cut off the women from leading, I think they miss out on half of God. You know, I don't know about what it's like in your house, but if I didn't have my wife around, it would be a mess. I know it's the same in your house. And so we have stories where people get tent pegs hammered into their heads. We get stories of the Israelites would get starved to death. Okay? Chapter 6, verse 4. They destroy all the produce in the land so that nobody could eat. By the way, that's how Mao in China killed millions of his people. Starved them. Stalin used to do the same thing, starve people. You don't even have to waste bullets. They can't eat, they can't live, they die, and you get to pretend like, well, I didn't kill them. All right? And so this is taking place here. And then Gideon, I like this question. In chapter 6, verse 13, he says, you know, an angel comes to him and says, hey, hi, I'm going to change things. And he says, if the Lord is with us, why then is all this happening to us? Where are His miracles which our fathers told us about when He brought them out of Egypt? Why has He abandoned us now and given us into the hands of the Midians? Sometimes you have to ask the honest questions. And it's so obvious. We ask the questions, well, the answer is because you're not really following Him the way you're supposed to. Okay? But then again, neither did the guys coming out of Egypt, did they? But what happened? They wandered the desert. They missed the promised land. These guys are missing the promised land. And so the angel says, I'm going to make a change in this situation through you. And so he tells them, tear down the other altars. He tears them down. He gets in trouble. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon Gideon. The next thing you know, God says, I want you to go beat these guys. So he brings all these thousands of people, and God says, oh, no. There's way too many people here. I'm going to be doing this. So get rid of all these people. Well, so what he does is he goes, everybody who laps up water from the river like a dog, 300 of them do that, everybody else go home. And God uses 300 people to stop this army that's subduing them. Why does God do that? Because he wants everybody to understand, you didn't do this. I did this. You didn't fix your problem. I fixed your problem. And I did it because I like you. Now, fast forward to your personal problems right now. Could be your health, could be your kids, could be your marriage, could be your work, could be your retirement fund, whatever it might be, your inner demons that you're fighting. Guess who wants to go to work in your life? God. And he's ready, willing, able to show up if we're willing to invite him. The Gideon story is a little bit of fun because he says, well, I'm going to put you to the test. And don't test God. You got to have faith. Well, God knows where we're weak. You ever play that stupid game, God, if you want me to do this, let the light be green when I pass through. You know? And it's green. Or worse, it turns yellow right when you're going through. So you have to do it over and over and over again till you speed up to find the rhythm of the traffic so that you get the green lights. And see how stupid it is? Well, maybe you don't do stupid stuff like that, but, you know, I do. I used to. So we got judges going on, and they said, you be the ruler over us. And he says, God will be the ruler over you. And, you know, you read that in the Bible, and you go, whoa, who rules over me? Does God rule over my tongue, my thoughts, my career path? Is God the one dictating what happens in my world? And so this wonderful guy, Gideon, he takes the crescent ornaments off of his enemies, turns them into a big ornament that he puts in his house, and guess what everybody does with the ornament? They worship it. This great guy gets it wrong. Sound familiar? Well, he has lots of wives. He dies. The people turn away from God. Okay? And on it goes, just like this, okay? Well, it's Valentine's Day, right? So I thought we would do a Valentine's story. Samson and Delilah. A love affair. You know, I don't know about you, but, you know, Valentine's Day didn't work out for me so well today. I'm sitting with my wife and my daughter, and my daughter says, Dad, are you going to take Mom out to dinner? I said, no, I'm preaching tonight. Well, shouldn't you have gotten somebody else to preach so that your wife would feel valued? Whew. Taylor Grace, don't talk like this in front of your mother. I told the Snowbirds a story today about this woman who on Valentine's Day gave her spouse one of her kidneys. What kind of a gift is that, huh? Talk about chocolates or flowers? Nothing like this. That selfless love where you just give to the other person because you love them so intensely. Well, here's the situation. Israel's made the same mistake. And by the way, Samson's about 1150 BC, just so you can put things into a time frame. And Israel's been enslaved for 40 years. God's tired of it. It's his idea. I'm going to raise up somebody to put an end to Israel's pain. He sends an angel. The angel comes to the woman and says, make sure that I'm going to give you a son. Make sure he doesn't drink wine and he doesn't eat anything unclean, and don't cut his hair. Okay? That's why Samson was a hippie for the Lord. And his purpose is to deliver the Israelites. And I want you to notice something. The purpose is not so that there will be peaceful coexistence between the Israelites and the non-Israelites. God wants to put a stop to that. And so the angel talks to the woman. It's kind of like the sign. Do you want to talk to the man in charge or the woman who knows what's happening? Okay? Angel goes to the woman who knows what's happening. And then the man says, well, gosh, tell him to come back. I want to talk to him too. And I like this. He wants to have a supernatural experience with the living God. How many times do we sit back and go, oh, I wish that could happen to me? You can. Why don't you ask for it and look for it and live for it? And guess who shows up? God. He asks, the angel comes back, they ask some questions, they say, what's your name? And he says, why do you ask my name? Because it's incomprehensible. He goes, oh, God's going to kill us now. And the woman, she's a smart one. If the Lord wanted to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted the burnt offering. You know, I like people like that. So Samson comes along, and it's love at first sight. He says to his father, get her for me, for she looks good. Okay? Guys, huh? Sammy, why can't you get a nice Jewish woman from the neighborhood? He wants that Philistine woman. And his father tried to talk him out of it, but what he doesn't know is God is behind Samson's dysfunction. Hear that. God's behind his dysfunction. He's going to use his brokenness to bring about his will. That's powerful stuff. Now, I'm not saying go ahead and let your dysfunction keep rolling, because your dysfunction will lead you to brokenness, which is the story of Samson. But if you take your dysfunction, you'll find God moving so that you will be the tool in his hands. So, Samson goes to get the woman. A young lion comes running on him. He grabs it. It says the Spirit of the Lord came on him. He tears the young lion apart with his bare hands. All right? So, he then, on his way home, sees the lion dead. Bees have already made honey in it. He reaches in and gets the honey, touches something unclean, broke rule number 1. Okay? And then really this is Samson. He's hanging out with the Philistines, and he tells them a riddle, and they say, look, we don't know what the riddle is. Ask Samson what the answer is. And his wife starts in, you only hate me, and you don't love me. And then it says, because she pressed him so hard, he finally told her. She told the Philistines. Boom. I'm making a big deal out of this because this nagging is going to get him in trouble another time. So women, I just want you to know the nagging can work. And Samson kills a whole bunch of people. He seems to have anger management problems. He does it again in chapter 15. Kills 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. Okay? He's a serious warrior. And he thanks God. But now he drinks. And guess what? What was rule number 2? Don't drink. Don't touch dead things. Don't drink. And now Samson, he's going to town, and he sees a harlot, and he goes to visit her. Doesn't have his lust problems under control, and this is going to get him. Okay? And he sees Delilah. He wants to marry her. And she starts in on him. Tell me where your great strength comes from. And here's the problem. He's grown so casual in his high calling. He's grown too comfortable with Philistine women. He's exercising his passion in the wrong places. And if you don't learn from the past, the last time you told the Philistine woman something, what happened? She told the Philistines, and it worked against you. But he's repeating the same sins. And so this is what it says. It came about that when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, that his soul was annoyed to death. And I don't know if you've ever been around a professional nagger, but that's about how it feels. So I've been told, okay? My wife's not going to get a copy of this message, is she? I'm just kidding. Come on. He tells, if you cut my hair, I don't have any strength. She cuts his hair. She says, the Philistines are upon you. He gets up, and this is what it says. He did not know that the Lord had departed from him. What a horrible moment. He goes out thinking he's the man like always, but he mismanaged his calling. He lost his power, and now the enemy blinds him. It makes him a grinder of the grain in Dagon's temple. It's kind of interesting. Samson, Saul, and Judas, they all killed themselves. And they were all conquered by their personal sins. So what does Samson do? The end of it all? This is what it says. The hair of his head began to grow again. What does that say about God? His hair's coming back. There's an opportunity. And so Samson calls to the Lord, Lord, strengthen me just one more time. And that's when Samson became the first comedian in the Bible. He brought down the house. He's in the temple. He tells the guy, remember, he's blind, could you put my hands against the columns? They put his hands against the columns. He says, Lord, avenge my two eyes. He doesn't even have the right prayer. Pushes the columns down. 3,000 people die. More people died in his death than in his life. And I want to say this, you need to conquer yourself before you conquer others. The miracles, they're available. But if we mismanage God, we're going to be buried underneath a heathen temple like Samson. Again, 17:6, every man did what was right in his own eyes. And here's the problem. They make idols, and I'm out of time, friends, but here's the situation. In chapter 18, they make idols, and then they try to be Christian and non-Christian. And I think we do that. You know, we do that with our cash. We do that with our entertainment. We do that with the way we live. And you have to make a decision. I'm either in or he draws the line. He's a patient God. He loves you. He puts up with a lot of stuff. But there does come a moment when he says, make a choice. And if we're so used to living in the dual worlds, we're going to become callous to his voice. And guess what? We're not going to hear that decision time, and we're going to make the wrong one. This happens over and over. We got all kinds of horrible situations taking place. Bring out the man who came into your house that we may have relations with him. According to the Bible, that's not conversations, okay? He says, you can't do that to my guest. He gives the man their concubine, the abuser all night long until morning, until she's dead. He goes, oh, this is a horrible thing. He cuts up her body, sends it out to everybody in Israel. They decide we can't have these kind of people in our lives. A civil war takes place, and they basically wipe one tribe off the face of the earth. What was going on? In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everybody did as they see fit in their own eyes. I think Judges has a lot to say to us. Because I look at the internet every day, and guess what I see? That kind of stuff. It's going on right now. What happened? I think we stopped listening to God. And now everything's going crazy. That's where you and I come in. God raises up judges, he raises up his people. And if you and I can teach our children about Jesus, if we can take them to work, if we can show compassion instead of judgment, if we can choose to love instead of hate, forgive rather than hold a grudge, if we do things God's ways, people are going to see the difference that Jesus makes, and they're going to see the emptiness of their own lives. And one by one, group by group, God's going to take over his world. That's our calling. That's our responsibility. Judges is a warning.